Yeah, I actually am fairly optimistic, just because we see that there's a lot of attitude change with regards to various diets. So when I trained, of course, it was the low-fat diet was sort of the standard, and it was not very good for most people. And so thankfully, we've sort of moved on from that, but we see real change. So you see, of course, the popularity of low carb movement and also ketogenic diets, very, very popular, at least in North America, like in, Canada and the United States. And the other thing is intermittent fasting is really gaining a lot of traction. So when I started talking about it, sort of 2012, 2013, boy, everybody thought I was like completely insane. Like really, everybody thought it was the dumbest thing they had ever heard. And now, of course, people are starting to shift. You see a lot more messages out there that, hey, this is something that we can do. And I always talk about intermittent fasting. I always say, well, first of all, it's different from diets. Diets tell you what you're supposed to eat, whereas intermittent fasting tells you about the time, like the time that you want to set aside for not eating, for example. So it really tells you nothing about what you want to eat when you eat. So it really can apply to whichever diet you want to apply it to. Now, there are certain diets which I think are better than others, but people have their preferred diets. Whether it's vegetarian or carnivore. Then some are you can do whatever you want and still add the fasting in. But the other thing, as you said, it's not only costs no money. It probably saves you money, but also it doesn't take any time either, right? It's not like if you're really
Exactly.
busy, you can't fast. You can actually, it's even easier to fast because if you're busy, you're going to gain the time. And it's available like anywhere in the world right now. That is, once you hear about it, it doesn't matter if you're in Brazil or if you're in New Zealand or if you're in Canada, right? You can still do it. The minute you hear about it, you can do it like tomorrow or today. You can start all right away. So it's not something that is sort of like, oh, this is great, but I can't, get it sort of thing, right? Like some of these drugs that they come out with. They're great drugs, but they're expensive and you can't get them. So what's the use? That's not what fasting is. Fasting is available to anybody who wants to try it. It's free, it's convenient, and it's been used for thousands of years, right? It's been, they write about it in the Bible. They talk about it during periods of time. So in Christianity, during Lent, for example, you'll have talk all about fasting. Like my when I go to church, I remember always thinking it's very strange because around April time, during the homily, they'd always talk about fasting. I always think, this was about 5, 6 years ago. And like I use fasting a lot, but I don't think anybody else really thinks it's a good idea. And yet the priest was talking all about it every April that we talk about it. And then Ramadan and Yom Kippur. And so you can see all these various religions. So it's not something that, I just made up like all of a sudden. It's actually been there all along and it makes so much sense. And it can help so many people specifically for what we are dealing with now, which is in 2020, obesity is a far bigger problem than malnutrition or lack of nutrition, which was a much bigger problem 100 years ago. And that's why it wasn't the right treatment for the right time. But you can't just be stuck in the sort of like the 70s or the 60s or whatever. You gotta come now and say, look, this is the reality of the situation. Almost all the diseases are linked to obesity. We have a great treatment that's been used, that's free, that's available. So why don't we use it, right? And there's no reason. There's actually no reason other than people don't know.